Well, it's 12:15, everybody, and so we're going to start this virtual roundtable of the ECPR's virtual general conference. The roundtable is entitled Academic Blogging and the Use of Social Media, Why It's Worth the Time. I am Martin Bull, and I am chairing the roundtable with Johanne Dohlie Saltnes, who you'll see there waving, and we are the founding editors of ECPR's brand new blog called The Loop, which will be launched on the 1st of October. And we are, of course, looking for contributions to that launch. And so we hope that this session will stimulate you to send us your ideas for blog pieces. So the roundtable is in celebration of the launch of The Loop. And in order to do that, we've brought together 4 specialists who know about these things. They know about blogging, they know about social media, they know about academic blog sites, and they know about the importance of this world to academe. And it's the purpose of this roundtable to try and convey the importance of blogging to academe and why perhaps you should engage with it, possibly more than you do so at present. Our specialists then are Amy Mollett, Mark Carrigan, Maria Giulia Amadeo Vicere, and Stuart Brown. I'm not going to introduce them in terms of their profiles. They can do that themselves, but all of them have experience and expertise in this area. We have given our speakers a fairly broad brief in terms of what they would like to speak about, whether it be social media, academic blogging in particular, academic blog sites, but the broad focus, as I said, is on why academe and academics should embrace this medium, perhaps more engagingly than the sector has done so until now. We're going to give the speakers 5 to 6 minutes each to speak, and a couple of them have got slides to show you, which should take about half an hour. That will leave half an hour for questions and discussion. The way in which we will be having the discussion is through the question and answer Q&A side. Because this is being recorded and because it involves giving permissions, we can't have people actually being invited to the stage to speak. And so we urge you and encourage you to post your questions and your comments in that column from the moment the first speaker starts, and we will pick those up when it comes to the discussion. I will be chairing the first part of this in terms of the speakers and keeping them to time, and then Johanna will chair the discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to ask in terms of the order in which the speakers appeared in the program, and so ask Amy if she will start us off. Over to you, Amy. You have 5, max 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, my slides come in at about 6 minutes, so I'm just going to set up my screen share. And if you could let me know if you can see these pink slides coming through. Lovely.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that's a yes. Wonderful. Thanks. So yeah, hello everyone. I'm Amy Mollett and I'm the social media lead at the UK Parliament Digital Service. It's great to be part of the conference, so thank you very much for having me on this programme. Today I'll give you a little overview of, oh hang on, I can't move my slide. There we go. I'll give you a quick overview about me and my background, then move on to some of the benefits of academic blogging as I see them, and why I think it's really important that throughout the life cycle of research that academics are blogging. And then, because my role is based in Parliament now, I'll be giving some sort of tips about what Parliament is looking for from academic blogging, and then just finish up with some references and links that can be picked up afterwards. So a little bit about me. My role is at Parliament, and my team use social media and blogging to communicate the work of Parliament to over 2.5 million followers all around the world. And that's covering everything from live streaming Prime Minister's questions on YouTube every week to Big Ben Instagram quizzes that are more geared towards teenagers. I've been at Parliament for 3 years, and before that I worked at LSE for a long time. And with my amazing co-blog editors, I'm co-author of Communicating Your Research with Social Media, which is a practical guide to using things like blogging, things like podcasting, data viz. So the slides that I've got are just pulling out some of the bits from the book and giving you a bit of a flavour of that work. So in our book, we talk about the possibilities and the benefits of blogging through all the stages of the research life cycle. So the sort of wheel of life cycle on the left here is showing through inspiration, which is of course the crafting of ideas and theories, through to collaborating through things like conferences and networking, and then primary research. Blogging can be done at all of these stages and is really beneficial for shaping ideas, for communicating with others. And then of course through dissemination, through public engagement, through impact. We're talking there about communicating findings and research outside of that department or outside of academia, and showing those demonstrable changes that have resulted from engagement and impact. So in the book we have a great selection of examples about how others have done this. So the next 2 slides are just pulling out some specific examples. So blogging can inspire some fantastic ideas. It's very rare that full theories and ideas just kind of appear for people. So blogging as a process to develop ideas is something we really kind of advocate for. Some examples here around from Mark Carnell on the UCL Museum and Collections blog. Mark has a great blog series about trying to work out whether an ancient bird species was a bird or was it not, and looked at some great evidence from a few hundreds of years and had some nice back and forth with other academics about that. And then Lizzie Camerata, who blogged on the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum blog, using blogging to ask readers and parents about how the museum could better involve and engage children and young visitors. So there's a bit of inspiration there, there's a bit of public engagement. So yeah, just 2 examples there for you. And inspiration is great, but policy impacts are often what people get very excited about. So if we're thinking about blogging as versions of academic research that no longer sits behind paywalls, it's accessible, it's easy to read, can be easily shared on social media. There are a few examples here. Gabrielle Seals-Bruges and Ferdy de Ville on the Policy at Manchester blog wrote about why the EU-US trade agreements would do little to boost growth. Their blog posts were picked up by journalists, they were picked up by a select committee who asked them to come and give evidence. And that evidence shapes the advice that was given to government and MPs' understanding of what was going on there. And if we look outside of academia, people like Jack Monroe, the food campaigner and poverty blogger, she blogged about her work. The all-party parliamentary group on food poverty invited Jack in to talk about their experiences of using food banks. And the evidence that Jack gave was discussed in the House of Commons chamber in a debate about the modern slavery bill. So inside of academia, outside of academia, publicly communicating your experiences and research means that there's so much more potential there for decision makers to learn from it and engage with it. Talking of Parliament, my last 2 slides. There are so many people, hundreds of people in Parliament right now who are interested in academic research that you are all working on. Librarians, researchers, public engagement specialists, historians, select committees, hundreds of people. There is a real appetite for using evidence to support decisions and policy, but parliamentarians and all these people often feel quite overwhelmed by where to start or the amount. So David Rose, David Rose and Chris Tyler wrote a blog post for the LSE Impact blog describing these seven insights for how academics can improve the chances of their evidence being used in Parliament. So you can see them on the screen there, but the ones that I've made bold really are the kind of golden ones for me: using accessible language, making papers open access, responding to select committee evidence. That can be through a blog post type format. So yeah, check out that blog post. My final slide is a suggestion of other things that you can do alongside blogging. Sign up for things like the Parliament for Researchers training at the Knowledge Exchange Unit at Parliament. Just give that a quick Google. They do webinars and things like that. And also talk to your public affairs teams and research teams. They can train you and coach you for what will come after blogging. So get in touch with those teams. Do your research about Parliament if policy impacts are what's interesting to you. And my final slide is just some references and resources which we'll make available afterwards. So that's my perspective on academic blogging in Parliament. So I'll hand back over to everyone else.
Thank you very much, Amy. We'll proceed straight on to the next speaker, who is Mark Carrigan. Over to you, Mark. Mark, you're on mute.
Okay, is that working now?
That's
okay,
working. Thank you. We can hear you.
Again.
Carry on.
I have a mute button on my microphone and on Zoom. I'm a postdoc at the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge, where I work on the political sociology of social media and digital communications in higher education. And my current work is about the transformation currently underway within the university. And I'm just about to start a large project called the Post-Pandemic University. And for that reason, I wanted to just reflect on the relationship between blogging and social media and the present crisis. Because we often talk about blogging as if it's something that's relatively new, and in a way that leaves us with the challenge of explaining and making a case for it to colleagues who might be skeptical and unfamiliar. Except I think this is quite a curious state of affairs when you consider that blogs have been around for close to 30 years, even if platforms like WordPress and Blogspot, which have popularized blogs as a genre, are somewhat more recent. And even though academic blogs are widespread with some enormous success stories, there's still a residual sense of novelty surrounding them. And the same is true of social media, in spite of the fact these platforms are an unremarkable part of working life for an increasingly substantial cohort of academics. The tendency, I think, for the 10 years or so I've been involved in debates about social media in higher education, is to present these developments as something new and worthwhile, advocating for their scholarly virtues in the face of skepticism and disinterest. It's framed as a matter of persuasion, leaving it to each individual to make up their mind about whether to embrace these new forms of communication. And this makes the transition towards what's called digital scholarship an inevitably slow and gradual process in which scholarly culture shifts a little more with each passing year through the slow accretion of individual decisions. At least that was the case until the pandemic, because with the imposition of lockdown and the closure of university campuses, in an important sense, we all became digital scholars overnight, in the sense of depending on digital communications for every facet of our working lives. For many of us, this will be more a matter of platforms like Zoom and Teams rather than blogging and social media. But I think it's important to dwell on the fact that we find ourselves confronting a comprehensively digitalized academy much earlier than anyone could have predicted. And for this reason, I think we need to think carefully about how we frame these technologies and what we assume about people's inclination or otherwise to use them. Because even on the most optimistic scenarios, we'll be working this way for the next academic year with physical contact minimized or staggered. And even on this scenario, we'll likely see shifts in provision and practices surrounding campuses and offices, even if we return to something approximating normality by, say, the end of 2021. And in more pessimistic scenarios, the ones that dispositionally I'm kind of glued to and drawn towards, where, for example, a potential vaccine either goes unrealized or carries only temporary immunity, this could be what our working lives are like for the indefinite future. And there are many problems and questions created by this that are beyond the scope of the panel. But coming back slightly to the point of this panel, My suggestion is that we should think about blogging and social media in light of our current predicament, in light of the last 6 months and the strangeness and the terrible things that have happened. Because if we all agree that conferences, workshops and seminars cannot take place in person for the foreseeable future, it does present us with an opportunity amidst the bleakness to think creatively about the purposes which these events serve for us and how we can develop alternatives which are robust and enjoyable. And furthermore, the rapidly growing awareness of the carbon footprint of academic travel means that actually we probably were going to have to turn away from a complete reliance on physical co-presence, even if the pandemic has rapidly accelerated this process by making travel newly arduous to supplement the risks which would await us at the destination. And for these reasons, I suggest we need to shift away from a focus on persuading academics about the virtues of blogging, as if this is a specialized activity, and instead frame it in terms of the conversations we can have about intellectual community, the reasons why it's important to us, and how blogging can help us pursue these under difficult conditions. I'd suggest we maybe need to open up the category of blog or even dispense with it in order to differentiate between the different things that blogs can do for academic communities. Things like providing a notice board for a discipline, operating as a clearinghouse within a field, consolidating a research network, driving forward specialized agendas, or helping findings and insights reach non-academic audiences. Because these are all very different undertakings which nonetheless use the same kind of platform for their work. And my concern is that the latter category of high-profile blog, which brings academic ideas to wider non-academic audiences, often dominates our imagination of what academic blogs are for, squeezing out some of the less public but no less valuable functions which these blogs can serve. We need to recognize this diversity if we want to assess whether blogs are worthwhile, because there are so many purposes they can be used for, as well as the practical questions which they present us with in our present circumstances. To give a couple of ideas quickly before I finish. We could think about how blogs can be better integrated into events. So for instance, how this kind of asynchronous technology can be integrated with synchronous meetings in order to do things like archive recorded talks, deepen the discussions that are taking place, and broaden the communities that are party to those discussions. We also need to think very carefully about how inequality and power work in specific ways online, in order to find ways to platform voices which otherwise might not get a fair hearing, while also ensuring that the gendered, race and class harassment, which is depressingly pervasive on social media, is something that we can keep out of our blogging spaces. And so I'm suggesting that under these conditions, we should be talking about academic blogging as a means rather than an end. When other forms of intellectual conviviality are disrupted by the pandemic, blogs and their editors have a crucial role to play in ensuring our communities can continue to thrive at a distance. And in this sense, I'm saying it's no longer a matter of persuading academics to embrace the novelty of blogging, but instead seeing how actually we're going to rely on this to do some of the things that we depend on for the communal life of the mind under conditions which prevent us from meeting face to face. And this means that we shouldn't see blogs as a distinct field of activity with their own standards and norms, but as a part of the social infrastructure of scholarship, a part of that infrastructure that is now suddenly much more important than it was 6 months ago. And this infrastructure enables academics to participate in collective projects. It helps us work together and think with each other, even when it's not possible for us to meet in person for the foreseeable future. And this might seem all very modish, but I really do think the last 6 months have completely changed the significance of blogging and social media. And so apologies for the kind of more abstract take on this, but I really think we should steer the conversation in that kind of direction.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. And we proceed now to hear from Maria Giulia Amadeo Vicere. Maria, over to you. You're on mute, Maria. Hi.
Sorry for this.
Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to share my presentation. Let me know if you see it, please. Do you see it?
Yes,
okay,
we can
great.
see it. Yes.
So I am Maria Giulia Amadeo Vicere. I'm a postdoctoral fellow and adjunct professor at Lewis University. I'll try to be as brief and as straight to the point as possible. When I was first invited to join the panel, I had a little brainstorming session with myself, and I asked myself why academics are so happy to be locked up and remain locked up in their ivory tower. And I thought, I mean, God, when I first started my academic career, I I saw the benefits of doing some academic blogging and to engage in the social media activity. Here, and I decided to put them down here for you. Increased dissemination of research, visibility of your research and citation. Evidence clearly shows that if you publish a shortened version of your research on an academic blog, well, then you will increase the downloads of that article and the citations. Foster scholarly discussions, which in my opinion also means a more democratic academic debate. Essentially by publishing academic blogs or using the social media, young scholars or even innovative scholars can launch their ideas without necessarily passing through the so-called gatekeepers in their discipline, but also foster debate across governments, civil society, and the public in general, and in this way avoiding leaving material hidden behind the paywall. As we all know, if we publish in academic journals or if we publish an academic book, chances are that only the scholarly community will access those articles and books. And by essentially publishing in an academic blog or by using the social media, you will increase your chances of having your work being policy relevant, which means that in essence, policymaker might have the chance to actually read what you're working on and potentially take it into consideration when they make their decisions. But also saving budgetary resources. I am quite young, but I am old enough to remember when we were still using flyers and posters to essentially advertise our work. Well, through social media and academic blogs, you can essentially save money and reach wider audiences than any print work, could do. And then also building your online reputation. Do you exist? This might sound like a rhetorical Black Mirror style question, but I was actually asked this question by a more experienced scholar when I first started my academic career. Back then I thought that people would eventually notice my work because of the quality or the potential quality of it, whereas that scholar told me, look, you really need to do something about your online presence because otherwise they will never notice you, even though you might, become a good scholar. And then I found it also useful for monitoring the performance of my work. I found particularly useful, for instance, ResearchGate and Google Scholar. Some articles that I considered to be quite boring, or at least I thought they would be less attractive than others, in the end they got more citations and more downloads. So also monitoring the performance of your work might be a benefit of using the social media, the academic blogs, and even those platforms. It teaches you also to adopt a simple language to explain complex phenomena, but also to avoid using a cryptic language to explain simple phenomena, which, if you want, is are the two poles of the faults that I see in myself, but also in other scholars when they write. But also it forces you to go straight to the point. And here I can tell you about an experience I had during one of my first graduate seminars. My supervisor during that seminar told me that a good scholar, but also a good thinker, is a person able to summarize one paper in one page in one sentence, and one sentence in one word. So by posting on academic blogs and social media, you might also be able to increase your skill as a writer, as an academic writer. And then it can help you reflect on academic blogging, and the social media also reflect the research other scholars are working on, which might serve as an antidote against the length of the publication process in academia. In essence, you might be updated on what is going on in other people's brains without waiting for the lengthy process of publications of academic journals or academic books. But obviously, it's not only the fault of academics that they don't see the benefits, or they don't value enough the benefits of doing some academic blogging and also engaging in social media activities. There are also pitfalls and hurdles to overcome, and I think we should be aware of those pitfalls and hurdles. We need to see the benefits, but also understand what the costs are, and maybe elaborate some strategies to overcome them before engaging in these activities. Time constraints and lack of financial compensation. Obviously, especially the early career scholars that are overwhelmed by daily activities such as teaching, following students, doing academic research, they might be reluctant or don't be attracted that much to academic blogging and social media activities because of time constraints and the lack of financial compensation. And then peer judgment. I mean, let's face it, there are still very traditional academic settings that might look at academic blogging and social media activities with reluctance. And especially early career great scholars might have supervisors that I really appreciate their activities in that sense. And then the lack of formal recognition. Journal articles and books are still essential for career advancements in academia, which makes sense given that they're peer review, or at least they have to pass a stricter peer review process, but still that might be a hurdle as well. And then something that I found particularly relevant in the past years, if you're working on a highly salient issue, media might distort your argument. So you need to be very objective and very neutral as possible, and base your opinion on facts. Trolls, I found myself in endless controversial discussions on Twitter at some point, just because I had said that the European Union was a multilateral power. So even there, that is a risk that you might find. And the tension between the freedom of speech and the responsibility of being or becoming an opinion leader. As human beings, we are inherently opinionated, and being an academic and engaging in academic blogging and in using the social media, in my opinion, also comes with the responsibility of basing your opinions on facts. But having said that, keep calm and blog on, because I do believe that in the end, after my little, what came out of my little brainstorming session is that I was right in doing academic blogging and in engaging in social media activities, because engaging in those activities in the end brings you more positive implications rather than costs, especially if you're well aware of the pitfalls that I just mentioned to you. There are strategies to just overcome them. So just sit down and think of the strategies, and keep calm, and keep on blogging on. It's great, and do it on the loop especially. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. And you can, do you need to stop your screen share?
Voila.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And finally, we come on to Stuart Brown. Over to you, Stuart.
Okay. Hello. So I'm Stuart Brown. I'm the managing editor of the LSE's European Politics and Policy blog. So I'm essentially going to do exactly what Mark said we shouldn't do, which is from the perspective of an academic editor, give you some reasons why people who are maybe a little bit skeptical about blogging should, give it a go. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organisers of this roundtable, because as someone who runs an academic blog, it's good to see the ECPR are starting a new site, and I'm sure, given the great research that's put out by the ECPR, it should have some really good content. So I'm looking forward to reading it. So why should you blog if you're skeptical about this? I think one of the main advantages, the least controversial advantage, is it's a relatively simple way to publicize existing research. So a lot of what we publish on our site is still very much based on journal articles and books and other publications. And it's a relatively simple process to convert a journal article that you spent potentially months or years working on into a blog. And for the amount of time that you put into it, you can potentially reach a much larger audience than what you would get if you just did a journal article. So I think from a time investment perspective, it's definitely worth it. But I don't think that that's the only reason that people should blog. I think that blogging should really be seen as a legitimate activity in its own right. One of the key advantages of blogging is that you can publish kind of time-sensitive material. So a lot of what we do on our site is election analysis, for example, which is quite well suited to blogging, but not very well suited to journal articles and books that obviously take a lot longer to publish. And also, even if we run an election recap, for example, like a week after an election rather than a day after an election, it can have a very large impact on the number of people that read it. So, I think blogging is a kind of natural outlet for that sort of research. And the main thing that I'd like to say about blogging is that I completely appreciate that academics have a lot of demands on their time. And, you might be wondering why you should dedicate time to blogging when things like funding applications, journal articles, and so on have a kind of more direct impact on your career. And what I'd say to that is that blogging doesn't necessarily have to be a particularly labor-intensive process. So sites like ours, we try to provide a lot of support to authors. We essentially provide a kind of free proofreading and editing service to authors. So articles don't necessarily have to be, highly polished at the time of submission. And I think given the potential rewards, the amount of time dedicated to it is a relatively good investment. And I'd certainly encourage anyone who is perhaps a little bit skeptical about it to give it a go. And the loop would be a perfect outlet for this if you want to give it a go. And that's all I've got.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Excellent. And we've completed, yeah, exactly within 30 minutes. So thank you very much indeed to the speakers for keeping to time. And we're going to move into discussion mode now. And I just, before I hand over to Johanna, just encourage you to start posting questions and comments in the Q&A section, and we'll pick up what we can. And I'm sure Johanna will try and do rapid round robins of these. Over to you, Johanna. You've got a couple of questions already here. Can you see them?
Yeah. Thank you very much to all the speakers and to Martin. I think you covered some common themes here, all of the speakers. You talked mostly about the whys of blogging, and I wanted to turn the discussion a little bit into the how part of the blogging, which we covered less so far in our discussion. So you all talked about dissemination, you talked about impact, you talked about how blogs can foster debates and all the benefits of that. So I wanted to kick off our discussion with a question for all of you, or perhaps two questions, and you can choose what you want to answer, and then we'll turn into the Q&A session afterwards. So what I want to ask you is, first of all, what is the most challenging part of translating a complex academic argument into a blog post? What are the big pitfalls that academics do? And a second question is something I picked up in Mark's book, Social Media for Academics, and that is the thing that there's a difference between blogging about research and blogging research itself. So you can blog about, I wrote an article explaining this and this argument in that journal or in that book, and you can refer to that article, or you can go straight to the argument itself and blog about your empirical findings or something like that. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of these two different types of blogging in your view? That would be really interesting to hear. So let's go in the same direction as the speakers spoke. So we'll start with Amy, and we can just do a round, and then I'll pick up on the questions from the participants after that.
So I'll give my experience of working as a blog editor. So Stuart and I used to work together, and Mark as well, actually. The most challenging thing I found for when we were working with academics submitting their work was the length. So if you're writing a blog post, it could be between 500 and 1,000 words, but if you're translating an article of 8,000 words into 800 words, that was the thing that that academics and researchers struggled with the most. As a kind of tip, we used to use a lot of subtitles, it's not subtitles, subheadings, sorry, to break the article down into sort of more bite-sized chunks. Yeah, Stuart can probably give you some more tips alongside that. And another thing that was challenging for academics, I think, was sometimes losing the complex terms, losing the abbreviations. If you're writing for an educated, informed but broad audience, think about those Parliament researchers, think about librarians, etc. You can have quite, you can use complex language, but it's making it accessible, it's breaking it down. So yeah, length and complex / not accessible language.
Mark, please go ahead. You're on mute.
Building on what Amy said, I think one of the challenges is learning the genres of academic blogs. So in my experience as a blog editor, you see people after writing a few times, they get a feel for it. And I think one of the ways people get a feel for it is that they start to learn that there are different genres of posts. There are some that are just presenting a headline finding. There are others that are theoretically complicating a common sense notion. And, you know, these aren't kind of laid out in any formal sense, but I think learning to get a feel for it is in part a case of reading lots of academic blog posts, getting a sense of what you like and what you don't like, and learning what works for you. And in relation to the second point, the kind of process of blogging about research is something I'm really passionate about. I think pedagogically it can be really important because it demystifies the research process. And the kinds of conversations that we tend only to have with close collaborators or our PhD supervisors when we're doctoral students, instead can take place through blogs in a more open and participatory way. And I think revealing that kind of backstage element of academic work, even in small amounts, it's both quite rewarding in terms of doing it yourself about your work. It allows you to find connections at an earlier stage. It kind of diffuses some of the anxieties about your work, in my experience. But it also really helps other people. And I think if more of us were to do that, it would lead to a slightly more open, more engaging academic culture.
Julia, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think I will answer to the second question, the question about the differences between blogging about research and blogging research. I found myself in this situation. Actually, I was thinking about it a few days ago. And in the end, I decided that blogging about research is potentially better in terms of results than blogging research. Why is that so? Well, essentially, if you blog research, you might still use those very cryptic terms and the cryptic language. And with cryptic, I obviously mean scholarly terms that we come up with, but that the wider community might not be able to understand or might not be interested in understanding. So blogging research might still isolate you in the ivory tower, whereas blogging about research might allow you to reach wider audiences. Essentially, you could put your research in more simpler terms and make it more readable, and but then at the same time, what you could do is put hyperlinks within the article, and through that hyperlink you can link the blog article to the academic paper, and in that way you essentially have both benefits of doing academic blogging and you know, blogging research for a wider audience.
Thanks. Stuart?
Yeah, so just in terms of the pitfalls of blogging, I mean, I think the most common sort of problem that I have as an academic editor is you quite often have articles that aren't self-contained, so they're constantly referring to like a book or a journal article or something like that, rather than just presenting the research as it is. And it's very hard to imagine that people will want to read that sort of article compared to just reading the research directly, especially when some of the research is behind a paywall. You know, it's a bit like if you're, maybe this is a bad analogy, maybe if you're like a band and you want people to buy your album, the best way to do it is to give them a song to listen to, not to talk about why the album is really good. And I think the same thing applies to blogging. So that's something that it's very hard to correct as an editor as well. So that's one of the biggest pitfalls I think people fall into. The other things are obviously, you know, using neutral, easy to understand language and avoiding terminology like Amy mentioned. I think that's obviously very important as well.
Okay, thank you for those answers. That was really interesting. And I see several questions coming in here from our participants. And a few of them pick up on the question about when to blog relating to research. So we have one question here from Manali Kumar. As an ECR, I see the value of blogging about my research, especially given the honors peer review process, but I wonder whether doing so during the life cycle of research would raise similar concerns about the difficulties of maintaining anonymity during peer review. There are also some other questions picking up on the same theme. So Dennis Penner, also any comments on blogging social media posts before academic publication or after academic publication? So I don't know who wants to pick up on that. Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps Stuart, Amy, or Maria Julia, perhaps you have some comments on that?
Yeah, should I jump in? Okay. So what I do generally is to follow the research cycle that Amy was highlighting in her slides. So I start thinking about an idea, And generally, especially if my research area is connected to the, say I work on EU foreign policy, okay? So I start looking at what is going on in the neighborhood, and I'm interested in a particular aspect of the neighborhood. And then I began to follow the specific country, for instance, that I'm working on. And before beginning to write my academic article on it, I might write an academic blog article on that specific aspect, throwing out ideas that are more politics related rather than policy related, for instance, given that I work on the European neighborhood policy. And that might be one way of, even collecting comments and having a discussion with other people on the academic blog, or for instance on social media. And then after I've written my academic article, after in the academic stage of the research process, then I might try to advertise it through a academic blog which is more focused on the research that came out in the academic sector. So that is what I would do as a strategy. Obviously there is a problem of anonymity. Sorry, you know what I meant. If you publish your article before the article is accepted, so you might be willing to find a balance in between the two aspects of it.
Thanks, Maria Giulia. It would be interesting to hear Stuart and Amy's perspective on this as well, as you have served as blog editors. Stuart, you want to go first?
Sure. So, I mean, I think it basically depends quite a lot on the journal. So I've published some journal articles that I originally blogged about, and in some cases it wasn't a problem, but in other cases they asked for me to delete the original blog, or which can be a little bit of a problem because sometimes they're archived on like Google Scholar, for example, and it's not very easy to get something off Google Scholar once it's already been archived on there. So it is potentially a problem. And one way around it is to, if you want to write a blog, to only include like a kind of limited part of your research rather than the full research, but it doesn't really solve the problem of anonymity. I mean, yeah, ultimately it does solve a lot of problems if you blog after the journal article, but that kind of, you lose a lot of the advantages of that because you have to wait quite a long time. It might be, that your research has gone out of date a little bit. So yeah, it is definitely a drawback if that's why you're blogging. I'm not sure what Amy thinks about this, but
yeah, I'd agree with Stuart on that, and I think it's also worth thinking about research not just in terms of peer review, but in terms of research that happens by organisations like Wellcome, the British Library, bigger research projects that happen maybe in partnership with universities or in partnership with research organisations. In multi-year, multi-partner research projects, you'll have, a good project will have built into it a communication strategy. So that's blogging about your work, it's doing conferences and webinars, it's doing networking and conferences and events and things. So for me, the benefits of weaving a communication strategy through a bigger project are they really speak for themselves, and that's what funders will want to see often. But if you take that model and apply it to your own work, maybe as a solo researcher or a small unit in a department, for example, like apply those principles, make them work for you. If you find that the peer review thing is an issue, then you'll be able to find a way to make it work, I think.
If I can just add something very quickly, maybe the best way to proceed, or at least what I would do, is to have a clear strategy in mind. So don't proceed in a piecemeal way. Just start with a strategy and follow that strategy. So if you want to start with an academic blog article, then start with the academic blog article without publishing your entire research. Then go through the peer review academic process, and then potentially summarize what you already wrote in the academic article. But have a clear strategy in mind. Even the pitfalls that I showed you in my presentation, I mean, you can overcome them quite easily as long as you have a strategy before you start writing.
Thanks, Maria Giulia. So, Mark, I wanted to ask you as well, because you talked about blogging, that we should think about blogging as different undertakings, right? As means rather than ends. And perhaps you have some perspective on this, on different type of blogging during the life cycle of research.
Yeah, I mean, I think blogging about a paper that's been published is a very specific style of blog post with a very specific purpose. You're trying to raise awareness of the research. You're hoping that people will go from the blog post to the paper, but even if they don't follow that link with its implications for citation, they've still, engaged on a more shallow level with what you published. And, I think that is in a way quite straightforward. With other forms of blog post, I think it can be much more personalized, and it can be as much about sharing your research materials. So anything from a kind of informal conversation at a small workshop through to just the kind of conversation you might have with a friend, someone you share an office with, someone you see for coffee on a regular basis. And for that, blogging is a form of informal communication where you're sharing a quotation, you're sharing a link, you're sharing a short reflection on something you've been thinking about. And people who blog in this kind of research scrapbook way, where you conduct the research process in part through blogging about it, can often find it very rewarding. There are downsides to that. There is a risk of your ideas being plagiarized, although possibly no more of one than if you're talking about work in progress at a conference. The point that was asked about the anonymity and peer review process, I mean, I've heard quite a few people raise that question, and I'm not sure if it's an issue. I think for someone to be able to recognize, for a peer reviewer to be able to recognize your ideas from a blog post and link them to a paper being reviewed suggests a degree of focus and attention on your work, which mostly won't be the case if we're realistic. And so I don't think there's any more issue involved in this than there is in the fact that you might have published other papers on the same topic.
Thank you, Mark, for those comments. So we're gonna move on to a next topic. And I see several questions regarding the theme of rewards and why we should blog. So Sarah Runderkamp first asked their speakers, most of you touched upon the limited official reward and recognition for blogging at universities. How would you go about rewarding this kind of work better? And also related, how can we communicate better the merits of reaching out to a broader audience? And then there's another question that touches upon the same theme. Maria Helena Sivonen, thanks for a great panel. How do you advertise your blogs and how do you get an audience for them in general? So if you want to pick up on that, let's start with Amy this time.
I think also Ran Goran's comment is in the same vein, the very last comment there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Ran Goran says, hi, thank you for all the speakers. For your interesting presentations. I'd like to refer particularly to the discussion by Maria Julia about the issues with scientific blogging and ask, is there a place in the scientific occupation nowadays, and particularly in the political science discipline, for more encouraging and particularly rewarding use of our research for impacting the society, among others through the sharing of research in the social media? What and how things should be changed in the operation of research institutions and the discipline as a whole to change the system of incentives and objectives. So this goes in the same direction as well. So,
shall I start on this one? So the question about reward and recognition for blogging at universities, I would really encourage any senior leadership at universities to support blogging. I would really make space for training, make space, and not just space, but budget to pay people to be your editors, whether that's full-time, whether that's part-time. It is a skill to edit blog posts, and it is a skill, and it takes time to manage and coach people. LSE have been great at that, and there are lots of other universities who have embraced that. I would really encourage kind of people at the top to make that happen. The other questions, let's have a look. I can't see those. I've lost them. I think I might need a pointer on the other questions, Johanna.
I think I put them in the answered category there, sorry. So how do you advertise your blog and how do you get audience for them in general?
Oh yeah, okay. So how do you advertise your blogs? So on an institutional level, so the LSE blogs, having a big social media following is the main way that readers are brought to those blog posts. If you're an individual, it's with your own individual blog platform, it's a lot harder to build that up unless you're some super famous academic. But if you're an early career researcher, if you're a PhD student, and you're just getting stuck into this, use those big institutional blogs. The LSE blogs, for example, aren't just for LSE academics, they're space for guest posts all through the week. So use those big platforms that are out there. And if you find that you love blogging and you want to be doing it every week, then knock yourself out and set up your own platform. But those big ones are there to be used. And the last question, I might leave that for the others.
Thank you. Maria Julia, do you want to comment on this as well?
So concerning, thank you very much for the questions. Concerning the first point, reward and recognition of universities, I think that things are already changing, to be honest with you. Compared to when I started my PhD program, people, especially in Italy, institutions, especially in Italy, are being more rewarding in terms of scholars and researchers using the academic blogs and the social media. What I do generally, what I started doing when I was one of the first to start using the academic blogs and social media in my PhD program, because I had spent a visiting period in the UK actually, and I must say that British institutions were more advanced in that sense. What I did was essentially get in touch with the media people at my university, and I found them very, very keen on supporting me in this. And what I do now currently, each and every time I participate in a conference, in a roundtable, or I publish an article, I alert them beforehand, and they're particularly happy to support me in retweeting or advertising my work. So I think that institutions are changing. At least my institution changed a lot in the past year, so I'm quite happy about that. Having said that, again, it depends on you and on your strategy. Obviously, you might want to use the institutional blog, the blog of your institution, besides LSE, also the blog of your own institution. It depends on the audience you want to reach. So if you want to reach, for instance, an Italian audience, obviously you might want to publish your article at your Italian institution in Italian. If you want to reach a wider audience, then you might want to use LSE blogs or other blogs that are out there. Once again, it depends on the strategy. And I think that's pretty much it. Obviously, once again, if say I want what I generally do, but again, that is my own personal strategy, is to publish my article in Italian for my own institution, especially if I want to reach the media, the Italian media or the Italian policymakers. And then if I want to reach let's say the international policymakers, but especially the academic community, the European academic community, then I go for the European blogs.
Thank you, Maria Julia. Mark, any comments on this?
Yeah, in terms of the recognition, I think it's useful to distinguish between official and unofficial recognition. At least in the UK, the impact agenda and the incorporation of research impact into formal assessment processes means there is actually an official infrastructure supporting this activity, one that often sits uneasily with prevailing academic culture. And I think in the UK context, it's kind of traditional academic culture that's the impediment rather than the institutions. And there's also the kinds of unofficial recognition. I mean, I think this is very partial, but at least within the UK Academy, there's a kind of shininess that people who are very publicly engaged can have for departments, because they recognize that there is this imperative to show the impact of research on wider society. And people who demonstrate a trajectory of engagement can be, in a very unofficial way, quite attractive to departments for that reason. But I think it clearly needs more than this. And I'd like to echo Amy's point that this stuff needs resources to work well, because the editor function is as a gatekeeper between the authors and different audiences. And, I think this needs to be reimbursed in the same way that, high-level journals provide honorariums for their editors for the careful, time-consuming work they do. And, full-time editors, I think, play a really crucial part. And just very quickly, in terms of building an audience, one thing that I think is really effective and incredibly easy for people forget is put your blog in your email signature. Think about how many emails you send to people within your network. As someone's already said, share your posts on social media, and more generally, ensure that people who might be interested about your blog, collaborators, colleagues, friends, know about it and know how they can sign up for regular updates. And if this is going to be quite time consuming and uncertain, with uncertain reward for you, as others have said, guest blogging can be a lot easier. It lets you write when you've got something to say, and the blog you're writing for has already gathered this audience for you. So if you've got a limit on how much time you want to put into this, that might be the best way to go.
Thank you for that excellent advice. We'll do a last round of questions. We have 5 minutes left, and I want to pick up on, there are 2 questions about different types of blogging here. So one anonymous attendee wants to hear the panelists' opinion on microblogging, Twitter versus traditional blogs, and Dennis Penu want to hear your advice on how to choose between publishing on a personal blog versus a shared institutional blog. So Twitter is so popular. Why is Twitter so much popular than academic blogging? Let's start with Stuart this time.
Well, I mean, I think the obvious answer is it takes a lot less time to use Twitter than it does to create a blog article, and there's also no risk of rejection as well, which is a possibility that hasn't been mentioned with institutional blogs. You know, I mean, our blog, we try to publish most of what we receive, but it's just not possible. Sometimes, especially during, for example, the coronavirus situation, there were so many blogs that were submitted that it just wasn't possible to publish all of them. So I think that's something that you have to keep in mind about using an institutional blog. And that sort of feeds into the other question, which is, what are the differences between a personal blog and an institutional blog? Well, I think personal blogs can definitely work, but you need to work a lot harder to establish your audience, probably. If you're going to publish very frequently on a topic, it can actually be a better option than an institutional blog, because institutional blogs are unlikely to run articles with the same contributors as frequently as you can publish your own blog. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear the other panelists' views on that though.
Thanks. Mark, do you want to comment on this as well?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. For a long time, I thought the terminology of microblogging was very confusing. And when Twitter extended their character limit and also threading became much more popular, it suddenly made sense to me in a way it didn't previously. I think contemporary Twitter threading is one of the most interesting forms of social media, where people can have very substantial intellectual contributions nonetheless expressed in this radically brief manner. And I think there's an art form to it. And I think a lot of Twitter use is not microblogging in this sense, but there is a particular way of using Twitter that is quite literally microblogging. You're blogging, sharing ideas in a much more concise fashion. And I've personally found this a really intellectually rewarding thing to do, because condensing them like that really necessitates clarifying exactly what it is you're trying to say. And so in that sense, I wouldn't see them as antipathetic as much as 2 different ways of doing a similar thing.
Thanks. Maria Julia?
Thank you. I very much agree with Mark on this. I don't see Twitter and academic blogging as mutually exclusive, but as complementary. So what I would do is do some microblogging to introduce my article on academic blog on Twitter. Do the microblogging on Twitter in order to introduce and advertise my article on the academic blog, which in turn might introduce and advertise my article on an academic journal. So use them once again in a strategic, complementary manner. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Maria Julia. Amy, the last words goes to you.
I think it's worth thinking about not just microblogging and Twitter, but other social media platforms as well. YouTube, for example, is the 2nd biggest search engine in the world. It's most used platform by under 30s or something like that. If your research is about young people or is about a particular topic, think about, and I know it's a lot for people to think about blogging and Twitter and everything, and before you even bring video or podcasts into it. But if you're working on a bigger project, and your audience is not solely academia, it really is worth like having a broader picture of what you want to achieve and who you want to reach on different channels. And yeah, I would echo what the other panelists have said about working with your university's public affairs team, your media relations team. All of these people are professionals, and they know how media, social media, public affairs works, and they can guide and coach you in the right way.
Thank you, Amy. And on that note, I think our time is up and we have to conclude this roundtable. So on behalf of Martin and myself, I really want to extend a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much, Amy, Mark, Maria, Julia, and Stuart, for sharing your thoughts and ideas and comments and advice on this. I think it's been a really interesting conversation, and I think Martin and I also will benefit from what you have said today in our role as the editors for the Loop, the ECPR's new blog. And I also would like to thank the audience for your excellent comments and questions. We have not been able to answer all of them, but we'll try to type in an answer now at the end of the session. And to wrap up, I'll just really like to say that Martin and I look forward to receiving all of your blog contributions from all of you, the panelists, and also from the audience. There will be a pitch function at the ECPR, the Loop's website very soon, up and running. So we're looking forward to receiving your contributions or your pitches for our blog there. And if you have any questions, you can of course get in touch with us via email or Twitter or any medium that you like. So with that, Martin, did I forget anything? Or?
No, I don't think so. The only comment I've got, just briefly before he finishes, we had a question asking the ECPR blog editors to comment a bit on how they see their blog, our blog, fitting within the landscape of existing blogs. And I wanted simply to say, well, do you know the Himalayas, Mount Everest? The Loop is going to be the Mount Everest of blogs. LSE blogs will appear as a foothill in the future, I'm sure, if you submit your ideas to us. There you go, there's a challenge. But all I want to do is echo the thanks that Johanne has already given to our speakers, fantastic contributions, and also to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.